9,000 years ago, thousands of people lived in a place that looked like a city but had no streets. Your front door was on the roof, and your ancestors could be buried under the floor.
The strangest thing about Çatalhöyük is not that it is old. Many things are old. The strange thing is that it takes one of the most familiar parts of city life and removes it completely. No streets running between houses.
No front doors facing a lane. No grand avenue leading to a palace. Instead, house pressed against house, wall against wall, until the settlement became a dense field of rooftops. That changes the whole mental picture. To enter a home, you did not walk up to a doorway from the street. You moved across the roofs and climbed down through an opening from above. Smoke, light, movement, work, and conversation all gathered around that upper world. The roof was not just a roof, it was path, porch, workspace, neighborly meeting ground, and entrance. This is why Catalhoyuk is such a strong story. It does not ask us to believe in a lost empire or a secret technology. It asks something more useful. What counts as a city before streets, palaces, kings, and public squares become normal? The answer is not simple. Çatalhöyük was not a city in the later Mesopotamian sense, but it was dense, long-lived, organized, symbolically rich, and crowded with human choices. It was a city before the usual signs of cities. That is the line the whole episode walks. We do not need to inflate Çatalhöyük into something it was not. The real settlement is already more interesting than the exaggerated version. The roofs, ladders, bodies, plastered rooms, rebuilt houses, and painted walls give us a rare look at dense life before the later grammar of civilization took over. Çatalhöyük sits on the Konya plain in central Anatolia in what is now Turkey. Today, the site is an archaeological mound, but that mound is itself a human document. It formed because generations built, lived, repaired, abandoned, and rebuilt in almost the same place. Mud brick does not last forever in a neat way. It slumps, fills, collapses, and becomes the ground for the next layer of life. That is part of what makes the site so visually powerful. We are not looking at one frozen city plan. We are looking at accumulated living. Houses became layers, floors became archives. Hearths, platforms, wall plaster, burials, and refuse all became evidence. The mound grew because people kept returning to the same social idea: build close, live close, rebuild close. The site became famous through 20th century excavation, especially the work of James Mellerart, and later through renewed long-term research that re-examined the settlement with more cautious modern methods. That matters because Çatalhöyük has always tempted dramatic interpretation. It has wall paintings, animal symbolism, buried bodies, and a layout that feels alien to modern urban instinct. But the best version of the story stays grounded. A dry archaeological mound on the plain becomes extraordinary, because the ordinary evidence is already strange enough. The roof entrance is not a decorative detail. It changes how a person imagines living there. A ladder led down into the house. The opening could bring light, air, smoke movement, and access all into the same vertical shaft. In many reconstructions, the ladder descends near the hearth or oven, which means the entrance was tied to heat, cooking, smoke, and the center of domestic life. Think about what that does to a neighborhood. The roof surface becomes the circulation system. Children, adults, goods, food, tools, fuel, and conversation all move across a shared upper plane. Instead of front windows watching a street, the community watches roofs. Instead of doorsteps facing each other across a lane, social life gathers above the rooms. It also changes privacy. A person descending into a house is entering from the sky, not from a front path. The household is both connected and enclosed. Down below, rooms could be carefully plastered, maintained, and divided by platforms and activity zones. Up above, the settlement could be open, noisy, bright, and social. Catalhoyuk makes architecture feel like behavior. The way people entered a house tells us how movement, smoke, labor, and neighborly life were arranged before streets existed. The ladder is therefore more than a prop for reconstruction art. It is a clue to the whole social system. It marks the line between household interior and shared roofscape, between smoke-darkened room and open sky. Every climb up or down repeated the settlement's unusual answer to a basic human problem. How do many people live close together without streets?
From above, the settlement is often imagined like a honeycomb. That image is not perfect, but it helps. Houses were packed so closely that exterior walls could sit directly against other exterior walls.
The empty spaces we expect between homes were largely missing. The normal city rhythm of street, facade, door, street facade, door does not apply. This dense pattern creates a different kind of urban logic. Movement is not channeled through corridors between buildings. Movement rises above them. The roofscape becomes the street network. The settlement is horizontal and vertical at once. Packed houses below, movement above, ladders connecting the two. It also raises a serious question about coordination. How do people maintain access, repair roofs, manage fire, share walls, and rebuild without a formal street grid? The answer may not require a king or central planner. Dense life can be organized through household memory, custom, repeated practice, and negotiation. People do not need a palace to care about where a wall goes if that wall touches their neighbor's house. Çatalhöyük shows that urban density can emerge from thousands of local decisions, repeated over generations, without looking like the later cities we are trained to recognize. That is why the site feels so modern and so foreign at the same time. Anyone who has lived in an apartment building knows that density creates rules, habits, irritations, and dependencies. But Catalhoyuk reached that problem through mud brick rooms and roof movement, not elevators and streets. The social pressure was ancient, but the underlying problem is familiar. Close living forces people to coordinate. The interior of a Çatalhöyük house could look simple at first. Plastered walls, platforms, a hearth or oven, storage areas, and working surfaces. But simplicity is misleading. These rooms were repeatedly cleaned, replastered, repaired, and remade. A wall was not just a barrier. A floor was not just a surface. The house was a living container of labor, memory, ritual, and family history. The repeated plastering matters because it turns maintenance into evidence. People kept surfaces fresh, they rebuilt features, they arranged domestic tasks in ways archaeologists can still trace. Food preparation, storage, craftwork, sleeping, heating, and symbolic display all happened in rooms that were neither fully private in the modern sense nor public in the later civic sense. This is one reason Catalhoyuk is so interesting. The big story is not hidden in a palace, it is inside ordinary houses. The home is where the settlement's deepest patterns appear. If later cities often announce power through monuments, Çatalhöyük hides its power in domestic repetition. A ladder, a hearth, a platform, a painted wall, a clean floor, a burial beneath that floor. The city is not somewhere outside the house. The house is the basic unit of the city. That also makes the site visually different from many ancient history stories. There is no single towering monument that explains everything in one shot. The drama is cumulative. The same kind of room appears again and again, but never as a lifeless copy. Each house is another variation on a shared way of life, another small answer to the same settlement-wide pattern. One of the most emotionally powerful facts about Catalhoyuk is that many of the dead were buried beneath house floors and platforms. That does not mean every burial meant the same thing, and it does not give us permission to invent a single dramatic explanation, but the physical fact is already intimate. The living moved, cooked, slept, repaired, and remembered above human remains. This makes the house feel deeper than a shelter. It becomes a place where generations are layered. A floor can separate daily life from the dead, but it also keeps them close. The past is not in a distant cemetery outside the settlement. It is beneath the household itself. In some cases, bodies were revisited, disturbed, or selectively treated, reminding us that burial was not always a one-time event sealed away forever. The careful point is not that we know exactly what every burial meant. The careful point is that architecture and ancestry were connected. A house could carry the history of people who had lived and died there, or who were brought into that space because they mattered to its identity. Catalhoyuk turns the floor into a memory surface. The city was built not only over older houses, but over older lives. For a modern viewer, this may feel unsettling, but it should not be reduced to shock. Many societies have kept the dead close in different ways, through tombs near homes, ancestral shrines, relics, grave visits, or family plots. Çatalhöyük gives that closeness an architectural form. The dead were not merely remembered in speech. They could be built into the place where ordinary life continued. Çatalhöyük is famous for its wall art, animal imagery, and reliefs. Bulls, wild animals, geometric patterns, and striking interior displays have all helped make the site feel unusually alive. The temptation is to turn every image into a decoded message, but the safer, more interesting path is to notice where the imagery appears. Much of the symbolic force is inside houses. That matters because it blurs categories. In later societies, we often expect religion in temples, politics in palaces, and domestic life in homes. Çatalhöyük does not divide so neatly. A room can hold cooking, sleeping, storage, burial, and symbolic display. The house can be practical and charged at the same time. The animals also remind us that Çatalhöyük belonged to a Neolithic world still close to hunting memory, herd management, wild danger, and seasonal rhythms. This was not a modern city cut off from animals and fields. It was a dense settlement whose imagination still reached into the bodies of bulls, leopards, birds, and wild creatures. The walls did not merely decorate rooms, they pulled the outside world inward and made the house a stage for memory, danger, food, death, and identity. A city-like settlement survives only if ordinary work keeps happening. Food has to be grown, gathered, processed, stored, cooked, and shared. Tools have to be made and repaired. Materials have to move. Çatalhöyük was not a mysterious monument sitting alone on a plain. It was a dense concentration of work. Obsidian is one of the most visually striking materials linked to the site. Dark, glassy volcanic stone that could be worked into sharp tools and traded or exchanged across distance. Alongside it were bone tools, baskets, storage features, plant remains, animal remains, and traces of daily production. The glamour of Çatalhöyük is not gold. It is mud brick, plaster, grain, bone, stone, smoke, and human repetition. That makes the settlement feel more real. The people who lived there were not symbols in a textbook. They were making meals, scraping hides, shaping tools, tending children, carrying fuel, repairing walls, and negotiating crowded life with neighbors. The absence of streets does not mean the absence of complexity. It means the complexity was organized differently. Catalhoyuk's economy is not a backdrop to the mystery. It is the engine that made dense life possible. This is also where the word ancient can mislead us. Ancient does not mean vague, empty, or primitive. The traces are specific: where people cooked, where they stored, where they worked, where they slept, where they repaired surfaces, where they placed the dead. Specific traces let us move past atmosphere and into lived reality. Çatalhöyük becomes powerful because it is detailed. One of the most important things Catalhoyuk lacks is as revealing as what it contains. Archaeologists have not found an obvious palace, a grand public temple, or a clear central building that dominates the settlement in the way later urban sites often do. That absence has made Catalhoyuk central to arguments about early social organization. But absence must be handled carefully. No obvious palace does not mean no power. No giant temple does not mean no ritual. No king's inscription does not mean everyone was equal in every way. It means power is harder to see through the categories we inherited from later cities. Authority may have been household-based, ritual, age-based, gendered, situational, or distributed in ways that do not leave one huge building behind. This is where Çatalhöyük becomes more than a curiosity. It challenges the assumption that urban density naturally produces monuments and rulers. Maybe some dense communities organize themselves through repeated household practices rather than centralized institutions. Maybe difference existed but did not yet harden into palaces. Maybe leadership was real, but temporary and embedded in ritual or kinship. The evidence does not give a simple answer. It gives a better question. How do people live together at scale before power builds itself a throne room? That question gives the episode its edge. We are used to civilization stories that move quickly from farming to kings. Çatalhöyük slows the movie down. It shows a crowded experiment in living together before the script reaches crowns, armies, tax tablets, and royal inscriptions. The settlement does not fit neatly into the usual ladder of progress, and that is exactly why it matters. Çatalhöyük was not built once. It was rebuilt again and again. Houses were abandoned, filled, burned, repaired, replaced, or rebuilt over older footprints. Over time, this created the mound itself, a vertical archive of decisions. A later floor can rest above an earlier room. A new wall can echo an old wall. A fresh household can live over the material memory of a previous one. That layered pattern changes the meaning of place. If people repeatedly rebuilt in relation to older houses, then location mattered. The settlement was not just a random cluster of shelters. It had memory. Rebuilding could preserve a connection to the past, even as the physical structure changed. For a viewer, this is one of the best ways to picture deep time, not as a timeline on a chart, but as floors stacked over floors. Imagine standing in one room while other rooms, older rooms, dead rooms, and forgotten rooms lie beneath you. That is what the mound contains. Çatalhöyük's history is not only spread across the plain, it is compressed downward. The city becomes a layered object, and archaeology becomes a slow act of reading through time one surface at a time. One of the most famous claims about Catalhoyuk involves a wall painting sometimes interpreted as a plan of the settlement with a volcano, often linked to Hasan Dağ rising behind it. It is a perfect viral image. The world's oldest map, a volcano, a city, a painted memory of landscape. But perfect viral images are exactly where we have to be careful. Scholars have debated what the painting shows. It may be a map-like view. It may be a patterned design with an erupting mountain. It may not be a city plan in the way modern viewers want it to be. The uncertainty does not ruin the story. It makes it more honest. Çatalhöyük is powerful enough without forcing every image into a modern category. What matters is that the painting shows how visually rich the settlement's interior world could be. Whether map, memory, pattern, or something else, it suggests that people were transforming landscape and settlement into images. They were not only surviving, they were representing. They were placing meaning on walls. That is a major human act. The debate itself is useful because it shows the difference between evidence and desire. The ancient wall gives us an image, but not a caption. The best Çatalhöyük story is not built from one dramatic artifact. It is built from many kinds of evidence: architecture, burials, plaster, bones, plant remains, animal remains, tools, residues, soil layers, wall paintings, and the spatial relationships between them. Each category answers a different kind of question, and each has limits. Bones can speak about bodies, diet, stress, movement, and health, but they do not automatically reveal beliefs. Architecture can show repeated patterns, but it does not tell us every social rule. Wall art can show powerful images, but not always their meaning. The site is rich because these clues overlap. The more categories point in the same direction, the stronger the interpretation becomes. That is why modern archaeology matters. New methods can ask questions earlier excavators could not. Microscopy, Residue analysis, human remains analysis, digital recording, and careful context can turn small traces into larger patterns. But good archaeology also resists overclaiming. It does not turn every burial into a myth or every painting into a headline. Çatalhöyük is viral because it sounds impossible. It stays important because the physical evidence can survive careful questions. The site also teaches humility. Every reconstruction is an argument, not a time machine. A beautiful image of rooftops, ladders, smoke, and people helps us imagine the past. But the evidence underneath must stay visible. That is why the video should move between living scenes and archaeological scenes. The viewer should feel both things at once. The settlement as a lived world, and the settlement as something painstakingly reconstructed from traces. A house at Catalhoyuk had a life history. It could be built, occupied, cleaned, modified, ritually charged, abandoned, filled, burned, or rebuilt. That means the end of a house was not only failure. It could be part of how the settlement renewed itself. A structure might stop being lived in while still shaping what came next. This matters because modern people often think of buildings as property first. We ask who owned it, how much it cost, and why they moved. Çatalhöyük pushes us toward different questions. What did a house remember? What made a room ready to be closed? Why rebuild near or above an older place? How did living households relate to dead households below them? The answers are not simple, but the pattern is deeply human. People do not only live in spaces, they attach stories to them. They mark them with repairs, smoke, bodies, meals, and images. Eventually, those spaces become too full of history, too damaged, or ready for transformation. Catalhoyuk's mound grew because endings became foundations. The city did not erase itself when houses died, it built on them. So was Çatalhöyük a city? The honest answer depends on what we mean by city. If we mean a later urban center with streets, written administration, kings, temples, and monumental public buildings, then no. Çatalhöyük is not Uruk, Memphis, or Rome. It belongs to an earlier world. But if we mean dense, long-lived settlement, where many households live together in an organized built environment, then Catalhoyuk forces its way into the conversation. That is why the phrase "city before cities" works. It captures the tension without pretending the evidence is cleaner than it is. Çatalhöyük shows urban density before the familiar package of urban power. It shows houses doing the work that palaces and temples later make visible. It shows rooftops functioning like streets, floors holding ancestors, walls holding symbols, and layers holding time. The most viral part of the story is true. No streets, roof doors, dead beneath the floors. But the deeper payoff is better. Çatalhöyük reminds us that civilization did not arrive all at once in the shape we expect. Human beings experimented with closeness before they invented the normal city. They built a crowded world from mud brick, ladders, plaster, smoke, memory, and neighbors. And 9,000 years later, that world still makes our own idea of a city feel less inevitable. That is the final image worth holding on to. Not a golden city, not a lost kingdom. A roofscape at dawn, smoke rising through openings, people crossing above rooms where others sleep, work, cook, remember, and bury their dead. A place without streets that still feels crowded with direction. A city-like world before the city became a thing we thought we understood.